We're here today to talk about something uncomfortable compared to our previous conversation. As usual, our topics on this show may be a little spicy, and that is the recent Valve, we will say, call it a devaluation of the skin market over in Counter-Strike. And you may think, well, what does that have to do with esports? Well, guys, the skin market, as you may or may not know, actually props up a lot of the Counter-Strike scene and esports teams and co-streamers and personalities, because turns out skin trading sites are pretty huge. And, you know, this is similar to a move that happened a number of years ago when there was a scandal with the skin betting sites that Richard helped to break the story. So why don't you summarize that really quickly? Because that dropped something, what, $5 billion out of the market or something? It was like a $5 billion gambling operation.
How long ago was that now? Is that like nearly 10 years?
Yes.
Good amount. We're talking like CS2 lounge type thing.
Yeah, it must have been. Must be
a solid 8 or 9.
Yeah, least, it must be coming up to a decade. Well, I mean, just to summarize, essentially, what happened was Valve is very judicious and generous in how it allows people to use its API, right? Because Valve value, kind of like community experimentation. And so what people sort of came up with the idea of was, what if we could use skins, these essentially, unique items in the game that don't hold real world value, wink, wink, wink. What if we were to use them essentially as like poker chips, gambling chips in a casino? And so they created a variety of these casinos, which were simply, loads of them sprung up overnight because, as I would later find out, there was essentially a, air quotes, criminal conspiracy where all of the people running these websites essentially colluded, shared information on how to register in places where, if they were investigated, the American government wouldn't be able to obtain financial records and things such as that. And then they just sort of threw them out there to the community. And I initially kind of was a bit reticent to call these things harmful. I am not, by the way, hysterical when it comes to gambling. I think a lot of people are. Now, that isn't to say I don't recognize there are a lot of problems with gambling. Gambling addiction is real, etc. I'm not a total denialist or whatever. But I didn't see how potentially dangerous these could be to young and impressionable people. I was quite flippant about it. I even made a joke at the time going, look, if you're going to get a gambling addiction, the best time to do it is when you're a child, because then you can't lose a house, you can't lose a car, you can't have your assets frozen.
Technically accurate. One's on point.
Deeply unpopular opinion at the time, even as a joke, but, whatever, right? So, so I was watching these things in the corner of my eye. And then what I started realizing was, mysteriously, if you wanted to be lucky on all of these sites, all you had to do was be an influencer. Holy shit, those guys were winning all the time.
Because they were streaming this, guys.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
It's weird to this day. Look, I've never been someone who bought loads of cases, but every time I ever got a drop of a case, I always want the key and opened it just for them, whatever, It's like 50 pence, isn't it, for me, basically. Yeah. I've never ever gotten a knife or anything like that, Monty. These motherfuckers, when they would turn their stream on, were just getting AWP skins, it was bonkers the look they were getting, put out with.
Yeah. And obviously as well, baked into how these things were advertising, and this is, I guess, the genius of the promotional aspect of it, was they were using streamers and influencers to essentially circumnavigate a loophole in Twitch TOS by just sitting there and playing on these sites, which, remember, were not casinos, opening cases all day, flipping coins all day, whatever it was. And because it was essentially free advertising for these platforms, they were being given house money to play with, which of course wasn't being explicitly stated anywhere. So what I started doing was I started turning over a few rocks. Obviously, I can't take credit for the T. Martin story. I think I helped hammer the nail all the way down on that one. I was more to do with the FaZe CS2 Wild kind of stuff.
The Phantom Lord.
And obviously Phantom Lord was the big one, because what we found out was behind the scenes, they weren't using like provably fair systems. And if you had created these websites, many of these people had, but not disclosed it, you could essentially go into the back end and, you could see what was coming next and bet accordingly. And that was done to create viral moments, because the moments that would go viral is, Phantom Lord loses it all on a spin, so you would bet big knowing you were going to lose, or and because it's not your money anyway, it's house money. Or,
we should really have tied this into our upcoming 4-player thing with the Sting. We could have done a whole thematic thing here.
True.
We didn't think it through. Because it's true. Like, obviously, the whole thing is they were basically like baiting their own fans into thinking like, I'm betting big with my own money. Like they never said that directly, but that was the implication.
Yeah, always.
And then obviously they never could lose anyway. And in fact, as Richard said, sometimes it was just rigged. Like the famous one with Phantom Lord, the meme was like he did act like that guy was Jarvis. It's like Joris percent. Never tell me the odds. Like fucking this winning with gambling, but that was the most blatant whatever, because he literally was just getting like the literal spins or whatever the fuck, wasn't he? So
and there was also that famous clip as well that came out, which it got deleted, but I was able to procure it before it did, and it was like literally where he lost and then it went whack, and all of a sudden it was a win, and he was going, "Oh man, did you see that?
That's amazing. I love it.
Did you see that, guys?" So
it hits the kill switch under the button. What the hell? Now I won. That's crazy.
Yeah, what I quickly realized was, ultimately this was essentially, again, I use the air quotes, criminal, because it probably should be criminal, but because it existed in this grey area, it essentially wasn't. But what was happening was the community was essentially being tricked, defrauded in some cases, because a lot of impressionable people were betting on these sites, and then these things were going on. I mean, remember...
It was also undermining the entire esport of Counter-Strike, because at the time there was so much money from the skin sites that basically they were paying the pro players more to bet on their streams than they were getting paid from their teams. So basically the entire pro scene turned into an advertising mechanism for these betting sites, and it became more important to them than playing the professional matches. And like the team, I remember the teams themselves at the time telling me like, we can't pay the players more than the sites are paying them. They're paying them, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a month. And this was 10 years ago. And this is before a lot of the VC had hit the scene. And they're like, we can't even pay. So like, we have to let these guys take these contracts, but we don't know if they're actually trying to win games of Counter-Strike anymore.
Yeah. And so anyway, by 2017, I managed to interview a coder that had coded a number of these sites, including some of the ones that were in the headlines. And he essentially gave me like back-end access. And I was able to like screenshot all of the things that you could do on these sites to essentially rig the outcomes. That article got tweeted out by Total Biscuit because John was, at this point adamantly against this too. He could see the kind of, not just from an esports perspective how it was destructive, but the thing that always would prick John's interest was consumer-related stuff. And essentially these consumers were being taken for a ride. If you use a gambling site, you are a customer. Lest we forget, it is a service. You are entitled to certain protections. And these protections were being violated en masse. And so it was a huge thing. And essentially what happened during this time was there were a number of cease and desist letters sent out by Valve. But as far as I can tell, not too adamant. They went after the ones that were the most notable. There were a number of lawsuits by affected customers that wanted to sue these websites to get their money back. There was the ongoing lawsuit with Phantom Lord, where all of my stuff was essentially used in evidence, all of my reporting. Phantom Lord technically won that lawsuit because the lawsuit he had was against Twitch banning him and whether or not they had to serve him notice because of a clause in the contract. But in terms of all of it wasn't that he didn't do anything bad with CSGO Lotto. That was never contention. That's how he
just tried to conflate it as that, though, didn't he? Make it seem like he was found. He even did the whole I found innocent, which is like, again not even true. Not guilty is not the same as innocent as usual.
Yeah, and so that was a whole thing. And what's also interesting, there was even Native American tribes were suing, Valve, because they had been apportioned as part of the reparations for what had happened to them, they were given exclusive gambling rights in certain states, I think like Washington, for instance. And so they saw this as being a violation of that treaty, essentially.
I
mean,
that
didn't even think of that fucking angle. Holy shit.
So what ended up bubbling up out of this during this 2016 to 2018 time period was pretty crazy. But in the end, all that ultimately happened was T. Martin and Syndicate got a fine from the FTC, and they got told that they could be audited at any time in the future on any of their business endeavors for the next 10 years at the drop of a hat. And pretty much everyone else got to walk away from it relatively unscathed, and including Valve, who obviously were on some level complicit with all of this by simply allowing it. A lot of people got insanely wealthy during this time, and essentially the big market and the interest in the market, the skins market, it's all born out of this time period, because people were able to use all these nefarious means to build these insane huge inventories, whether it was dodgy sponsorships, rigged gambling outlets, scams. I mean, I lost count of how many different iterations of skin scam I saw during this time.
And, the estimate was something like $5 billion on this. It was something outrageous, right? This black market of skin betting was phenomenally valuable.
Oh, it was worth billions for sure, yeah.
So, I mean, people got very rich, and like this was a huge deal, and it was going to explode into some sort of regulation, at least within the United States, if not elsewhere as well. And so that's why Valve, had to shut this down. And
By the way, one other thing to say as well, if people don't get the mechanism behind how this all worked as well, it's like Richard says, Valve never told people do this or ever said we're fine. What they did is just never address it. Essentially, they just left it as like a weird loophole. Because if people don't know how you even do, let me explain to someone. If you go onto one of those sites where you buy a skin from someone, well, there isn't actually a mechanism in the game where people use fiat and buy the skin, and it somehow goes to an escrow. What essentially happens is it just uses, as far as I know, Richard, still to this day, don't they just use bots that essentially just do like an automated version of what you as a person would do if me and Monty just traded skins?
Yes.
So essentially what Valve's letting you do, this is why when they do like the 7-day lock, etc., it fucks those sites, because it makes it even more complicated, and the facade of we're the ones doing it like kind of goes away. Like basically the whole premise is they're acting as though there is no such thing as gambling, and as though the skin really has no real world value. It only has value in the game to me and Monty if we're trading. And even then, by the way, the whole point of the trade system is if he wants, people have done this many times, he could just offer nothing and I can give him everything in my inventory. Like they really do act as though there is no real world financial aspect. But by allowing this, it is obvious that you do know it is happening, and that you do know you are tacitly approving it and profiting from it. Because if you actually wanted to fuck this and shut it down, there's a million ways you could do it. There are so many ways for this process. You could get, as they have done with the locks for a week and stuff, you could get in the way of this. If you really never wanted this to exist, you could have done that a million times over. So to me, that's why Valve being implicated has to happen eventually, because on some level they clearly are not only aware, they just, as you say, wink wink, profit from pretend it doesn't exist,
Yeah, so it's like, for instance, with the case opening sites, because obviously I do want to make a distinction between the gambling and the case opening. How the case opening sites would essentially work is like Duncan described. You have a graphical interface that makes it look like you're opening a case, but what's really happening on the back end is a bot goes out and essentially retrieves the skin that you've unlocked and then gets it ready to trade to you. And as a result of that being the mechanic that's at play, just with this graphical overlay that doesn't make that explicit, what you could do is you could literally set it. So let's say it was $2. Well, in some cases it was $2 per opening on these websites, right? I can press a button and just make it so the only skin I will ever retrieve for you is worth between 76 cents or $1.20. And it will only retrieve those skins. And so what then happens is people don't want those skins. They don't want the cheap skins. So I've already made potentially 80 cents profit per spin. But then what you would also do is you could convert that to credit. But it wouldn't, obviously, it would always be the lowest skin. So the credit you're getting is only existing in the website for further spins. You never had ownership of the money anyway, and they are pocketing essentially 80 cents every time you spin anyway. So it was ridiculous. And like, it was literally, you could just press a button and that's the only types of skin it would bring back for you. And there was, many such cases, as you might say. So yeah, it was wild. Like, when I started looking into this, I didn't realize like how bad it was. And, the whole thing from top to bottom. It's why I always said, the whole skins business is dirty, because a lot of these people that now are like, oh, I'm just an enthusiastic trader, man. I just have a big inventory, man. It's just a hobby, man. I just do it for fun. They all got their inventories using shit like this, almost certainly, in the vast majority of cases. So whether or not they directly engaged in dirty behavior or were just beneficiaries of it, I don't think that's much of a distinction, frankly.
And, how this plays in today, guys, is Valve stamped all of this out. This is not allowed in any capacity anymore because of this scandal. But it did, basically vaporize a multi-billion-dollar betting market. And so where we are at today is that Valve has now decided in their latest patch, and in true Valve fashion, I mean, why would they tell anybody about this? But Valve never tells anybody about anything that they're doing, is that they have decided that in their latest patch that they are going to change the way that players can acquire the most valuable in-game items. And these are some items that could be worth tens of thousands of dollars, particularly gloves and knives. And so instead of having to open a case and then randomly at a very high level of rarity, like a fraction of a 1%, get one of these items. Now you can also use 5 red items, which are lower tier items, to combine them to get one of these higher tier items. And the knock-on effect of this was basically overnight, the highest value items cratered in value, erasing what some people have estimated at between $2 and $3 billion of value, which we'll get to in a second if you think that sounds crazy.
According to Price Empire, it was $3 billion was wiped out in 38 hours on the market. Yeah.
Because these items then decreased in value because people could trade the red items, and it also increased the price of the red items because now people were rushing to get the red items so that they could trade them up into the higher tier items. So it more or less like compressed the market, but it didn't make the red items go up enough in value to offset the loss of the high tier items, hence the $3 billion of loss. And if you guys think that sounds like a lot, nobody knows how much money Valve makes off of Counter-Strike because Valve is a private company. But I have seen estimates that between sales of skins and case keys, that Valve makes over $1 billion per year just on skin sales and case keys. So considering Counter-Strike CSGO has been out, and remember, all the skins from CSGO ported into CS2. CSGO was launched in 2012. We now have over 13 years of skins that have kind of accumulated.
Give the skins were 2013, but whatever.
Yeah, sure, 12 years, whatever. It's over a decade of accumulated skins in a market that is generating Valve $1 billion per year, and that's not the secondary market.
I'd be amazed if it was that low, frankly.
Sure. Because that's just the keys that they sell to cases, and then also their cuts on, because Valve gets cuts of what takes place on the community marketplace. So they actually take around 15% of sales. So, they've got a huge financial stake in this. And it's also another reason why Valve doesn't really care about how valuable the skins are ordinarily. So you guys have anything to add about this massive drop in value?
Another thing I would say is, let's face it, another thing we all know, all of our friends who are owners in the industries beg for this all the time, is where's all the fucking team-based stuff? Where's the team-based gloves and all the, where do I get my skin? Where do I get my AWP skin that's simple if I'm Na'Vi 10 years ago and he does that jump in, no scope, etc. Well, the real problem, Monty, is just like in League, because we don't have any actual quantifiable numbers from the game dev about how much they make, we can never figure out, are we just small fries to them and there's there's no point them letting us in on the cart. Are they just making infinite money anyway without, like, no, the problem is we have no parameters that we can only speculate based on knowing people in the industry and what the companies tend to be like, because that's always been a question I had the whole time, was like, I've always felt like that one of the reasons why they allow esports to stimulate the market and to keep people interested in the game, but if you notice, they don't do what would be slam dunks in any other industry. Like, think about it, guys. Imagine, like, in the NBA, there's no Jordan gear. Like, it would be stupid. That's how these entire sports run. Like, it's all about getting all these. So the idea they just don't care about having, like I say, like a simple orb skin or something, it's just insane. That sounds like you just don't want the money. And I'll tell you the problem I have, Monty. I've always had this suspicion about both Riot with their selling skins themselves and then Valve with allowing the skin market is. That implies to me you might be making way like magnitudes higher amounts of money than we even know. So your whole thing is you just don't want any attention on that field. You just want everyone to think it's just some vague thing over here, because if anyone ever pulled on that first thread, the whole thing would unravel, I feel like.
Yeah, and also I think it's especially important in Counter-Strike because I think, apropos of nothing, my own speculation, that probably Counter-Strike has the highest percentage of players that convert to esports fans. So I would assume that esports skins would do particularly well in Counter-Strike. Whereas if you look at a game like League of Legends, enormous player base, very bad conversion of game players to esports viewers, but I imagine it's quite good in comparison for CS.
I don't think it's a coincidence, Monty, that like now, the modern day, you have actually the most amount of online cups and competitions in Counter-Strike every single day, bro. Every day. Like, the joke is, Simple had to go to tier 2 and play it online now because he's not in the top set. There's been times, bro, where he plays multiple games a day because that's sometimes what the scheduling is like, right? That isn't just cause there's loads of viewers randomly that love watching shitter online Counter-Strike. It's cause these are just excuses to create fucking more games to bet on with the skins. And if you ever go and read any thread, bro, on HLTV for some of these random online cup games, let's say one that doesn't have Simple, it's the same tournament without it, it's two random teams you've never heard of, bro, you'd be shocked how many comments there will be below, this team's going to win, and you're like, there's no way you guys follow this level of CS. It's just because of the betting. That's still a real thing. That's still it's why actually when we talk about League and them letting betting in, that's also why I was so shocked it took them so long. It's an obvious thing that stimulates the average pleb customer to be more interested in more of the games in the league. Like, because think about the analogy in League would be, all of a sudden people might care more about like North American League if there's someone who vaguely knew the players anyway and wanted to bet on it. Yeah, whereas if you have to just do it just because you love the game and you want to watch the highest level league, that's a different fucking question, isn't it? So no, it's definitely a massive part of it.
I think as well, look, the reality is, I think Valve, like, probably, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. I think when they created skins and by extension the skins market, we have to remember, right, they'd been through various iterations of this. We had them in TF2 with hats and cosmetics, and we found all sorts of interesting shit was going on in that space, right? For instance, there was reports that the Russian mob was using TF2 keys to launder money. They would buy them in bulk and sell them, and then with a bot, and then take the money out, and then, all of this stuff. So that was happening. And then obviously it was Dota, and we, saw how different cosmetics could accrue value based on scarcity in that. And I think what they probably weren't thinking too much about, because it wasn't really a thing back then, they essentially created a cryptocurrency. And they didn't really. I don't think they realized the ramifications of that when they just dropped it in to a teenage player base. Like,
CS skins are basically NFTs. The thing is that people got really mad when NFTs were released because there was people are like, I don't want NFTs in games. Actually, I think if we're honest, NFTs in games are probably a good thing, because at least you would own the NFT instead of it being a license from Valve like these skins are. But if you want to see what an NFT economy looks like, that is Counter-Strike, right? There's a marketplace where, you are given these objects and you can trade them, and they accrue real world value because of rarity and desirability and the fact that it's kind of a weird functioning mini economy. And the difference is that Valve can screw with this a lot more than they could screw with NFTs should they have existed. So I don't think NFTs are the great evil of gaming as people presented them to be. And in many ways, it would be preferable to this system that Counter-Strike has, even if it would be similar on its face.
I mean, obviously, to be clear, I think NFTs are total bullshit, and I never even bothered with cryptocurrency because I think anything
but the NFTs aren't bullshit in the context of in-game items.
Yeah,
like they're useful in this case.
What'll end up happening is, right, because you know how people hear the trigger word and then they just fill in the rest of the sentence?
Yes.
They're going to be like, okay.
What was going on with NFTs was obviously nonsense. What could be done with NFTs is something akin to CS skins.
Yeah, well, too late. They killed that goose as well. That goose is gone. It's dead. So now we're just on to Web3. That's the latest grift. Whatever the fuck that in AI. Whatever the fuck.
AI. It's definitely AI, by the way.
Yeah. So anyway, some thoughts about this, right? So first of all, because we're talking about just the how they've altered scarcity. Now, this is an interesting one because I don't see necessarily where the external pressure would be coming from for them to make this change. So again, just to reiterate, the reason it's wiped 3 billion, according to some measurements, off the skins market is you are no longer beholden to the odds to get a knife. So if I want a knife or gloves or whatever the fuck it might be, I can now essentially trade up. I mean, you can only really trade up to the, it's knives and gloves are covered by this. So, you can trade up for a stat track knife. If you take the 5 red stat track, you can trade up to a regular knife or a regular set of gloves if you use the 5 regular red ones. And as a result of that, that means that it's now easier to come by these knives, and therefore they're going to be not as rare, and therefore the scarcity is linked to value, etc., etc. I don't know why Valve have essentially done that now, because nobody has ever complained about, the knives, like, they have too much value. I've never heard that complaint, ever, by the way.
Well, sometimes the government sends you a letter privately.
Yeah, exactly. So this makes me wonder if it is, just something that is part of this broader thing that Valve are doing. So, let's just rewind. Prior to this update, they created something called the Genesis terminal, right? Which sound, a bit
sounds like something James Cameron scripted.
yeah, exactly. A bit grandiose. But essentially, what it is it's instead of a case, you get a terminal that you open, and once you open it, you have 3 days to decide whether you want the skin that it offers.
I like the way it sounds like a Twilight Zone episode. Even I know.
Picture a man with 1 terminal, 5 skins, 3 days. Ridiculous. But anyway,
and he's about to come up on the last hour of the 3rd day. Tick tock, Mr. Smith.
Yeah, I know.
It's so whack, isn't it? Why are they like this?
So anyway, you've got 3 days to decide if you want the skin that it offers, and it will offer you 1, and then it will offer you, and if you don't want it, it'll offer you another, and all of those skins will have...
It's just the idea that now you've just got some fucking pleb you wouldn't believe the skin offer I had, man, because I didn't have the money for it. Just shit stories about 4 more.
To explain this, it comes up with an offer. And it's like a personal sale for you, but you have to pay Valve money in order to acquire the skin that is being presented.
You still got to pay for the skin. I want to make that abundant.
They're essentially operating. Valve themselves now operate on the principle of the Turkish market salesman I encountered on my holiday, where they offer me specifically a price because I have a nice face. You know what I mean? Valve's now doing that.
I thought you were going to do the
apparently.
ice cream bit.
No, listen, they're also doing that too.
Basically, you pay for the terminal, and then you open the terminal, and then the terminal goes, "Hey, want to buy your skin?" And it's like, so I don't get a skin. No, you could buy this one. I don't want that one. You click it, and then eventually it'll offer, that skin's sick. That'll be $1,600. That's some of these skins are obviously insanely priced, and if you don't want to pay above market value, it's got to be set. If you actually, the people who know more about skins than me have crunched the numbers, and some of these skins are coming out above market value. About if you would just go and buy them. So ultimately,
which already, that part seems alarming already, because that feels like you're defrauding the customer. Then I get that you don't acknowledge there is a market and all that jazz, but
exactly.
still feels a bit off. You know?
You see, Thorin, it was the market that was wrong, not Valve.
Yeah, and
why were they discounting those skins?
What's also
someone should put that bloody market on trial. I tell you what, that market's got a lot to answer for.
What's also interesting is as well, like obviously all the offers are random, so you don't get to choose. There are no like knives or gloves in a Genesis terminal. That they will never drop. Which is why it's important to talk about this coming first, because it's essentially stage one. And all the things you buy, you can't trade them away for like 7 days. They're subject to the usual trade ban, which they also implemented a while back to stop people like doing instant scams and like hacking an account and trading everything away and all this stuff.
More cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.